Well, welcome all. Hello, everybody. I'm Phil Johnston from Celtic Sea Power, and today the webinar is on how to increase UK capacity for the delivery of floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea, but we are looking for export potential as well, so do bear that in mind as we move through. It's the first of a series of webinars, which I'll mention in a coming up slide. But as I've said, just for any stragglers, we will be recording this webinar, so do be aware of that. If you make interjections, do feel free with questions on messages. That would be great, and we'll follow up as best we can in the time remaining of the hour, or if not offline, following up. So onward. In terms of agenda, I'll give a fairly brief overview of floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. This being the first webinar of a series of 5, I will linger a little bit for those that are unaware, but as we move forward, I'm aware that many people are well aware of it and have heard me bleat on about it too often already. And then just kind of hopefully throw out a few provocations about how we're actually going to deliver that, focusing on capacity rather than capability. But really, Luke's going to pick up the heavy lifting with the detail on technical challenges and commercial barriers, and that builds on work that Luke's been working on concrete for about 18 months or so now, Luke. And then also Matt's going to boulder in and take the credit for the webinar around about the halfway mark, probably a little bit after, I think, after we've slipped, on what does good look like for Cornwall and the UK. And also launch some or tease some ITTs that we've got coming in the new year. So, without further ado, we'll move on. Just a quick explainer of who we are, because some people are still unaware, believe it or not. And we are quite an odd fish, so we do require a bit of explanation. With Celtic Sea Power, essentially we're tasked with strategic regional development for floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. The real driver for this is to maximise social, economic and environmental benefit for Cornwall. We're wholly owned by Cornwall Council, but we work in lockstep with the region, and it's for UK PLC. Accelerating flow development is a key driver as well. I prefer streamlining, because the pacing of it is we're all keen to get to net zero, and but we're not necessarily on the same time frame as developers in the test demo. We are looking to the longer haul. We keep a very close eye on that 4.5 gigawatts and beyond. So we're based in Hale, Cornwall and Pembroke and Wales. We've got a small but well-skilled team, and as I say, we're owned by Cornwall Council. This is a bit of a wordy slide, but it's important to read. It's a new project which is about strategic sector development. We're working with a catapult on it, and it will use the data, knowledge, capability, collaboration, experience gained by ourselves, Celtic Power, and the offshore renewable energy catapult over the last 2 years. To drive Cornwall and the Isles City's readiness to maximise the benefits of a once-in-a-generation levelling up opportunity of a £19 billion floating offshore wind industry on its doorstep. The key outcome of this work will be the Cornwall Flow Commission, an independent board with convening capability. And the activities that we're now beginning will cover key strategic elements, including infrastructure, ports and grid, streamlining regional consenting, catalyse private sector capacity, which is this particular strategic pillar, workforce development. And the outcomes will underpin future work by this commission. And the project has been made possible by shared prosperity, levelling up funding from the UK government to Cornwall Council and the Council Isles Scilly and the appropriate logos there. So you can tell that's apologies for me reading out the small print, but that's quite important I get right. As many of you will know, it's a fairly clear continuation of Celtic Sea Power work to date under the Cornwall Flow Accelerator, which is the ERDF funded alongside the catapult, also University of Plymouth and University of Exeter as well. So in terms of this thread on catalysing private sector capacity, we are, and this webinar, of course, we're looking to increase that private sector capacity in key areas where there's significant opportunity, partnerships and consortia, investment and de-risking intervention. It's in terms of identifying those key those market segments. Concrete is first off the list, but O&M has been identified as an area that can really bring economic benefit to our region. Inter-array cables got huge potential, anchoring and mooring, and also finally cross-cutting products and services, which mops up quite a few significant elements such as marine operations, vessels. So we'll return to that in due course. But really, it's about leveraging the capability that we think we're very confident exists. It shows up in all the reports and studies that get done, but doing it at scale, not least because 4.5 gigawatts and beyond is going to need scale, but also scale because that seems to have been the missing factor in previous offshore wind for UK local content. We're not doing this on our own. We work in lockstep, especially with the Welsh Government and Marine Energy Wales across the water, and the Celtic Sea Cluster has been formed for a year and a half, 2 years now, to mostly wrap in the public sector entities, but also and provide a regional voice. So it's also, for many people on this webinar, it's a great source of resources. If you click the link here, there's many reports have built up. So work our way through those. It's a bit of a gold mine. I can see some people still arriving, so I think someone's letting them in. Julie, is that you? Is that Luke's letting them in? So I appreciate that. Thank you. It's great to have so many people here. Just akin to the scale of this, here's I tend to imagine it being on the south bank of London, and imagine looking at the London Eye, scaling that up by a factor of at least 2, and then sort of plonking it on something. So it's about as high as the I think a little bit shy of the Shard. Shard gets thrown around, but it's actually the next bit, the foundation, which Picklesby, that has to be based on a substantial base, which would clog up the Thames very, very quickly. I think look at the sort of footprint of a football pitch, but Luke will correct me on that later. And in terms of the time frame for that and the pipeline, sticky slides today. Kelsey Flow pipeline, I think that's the latest map. They do change every now and again from the Crown Estate. We're looking at these test and demo sites in the next few years, followed by that 4.5 gigawatt ambition by 2035 is set out by the Crown Estate, and then keep your eye on that ambition. No official word on it yet, but we're looking. There's plenty of wind out there, so hopefully by beyond 2035, we're looking at another 24 gigawatts. It's important to mention the test and demo sites. We'll learn a lot of lessons from them. They're not necessarily indicative of the way they'll go, not least in technology choice. The Hexagon's Twin Hub will be the first in the water, and that's the old Wave Hub site, for those that are aware. In 26, 27, we hope. Many of you will be aware that the AR5 was a bit of a damp squib, and that put data on Erebus, but 100 megawatts from that we hope in the near future, the next rounds. And we also have Flirtation's Whitecross, Flaventis is 1 and 2, and also Simply Blue's Valorous as well. So that will take us to about a gigawatt by 2030, maybe 2031, given the setback of AR5. But we do see it as a setback. The important thing is to keep your eye on these bigger numbers, 4.5 gigawatts. For those who don't think in terms of gigawatts, that's bigger than Hinkley. Hinkley's will provide 3.3 gigawatts. So this is a hefty, major national infrastructure that addresses any security needs, and of course goes toward net zero. Moving on then, challenges. There are a few. There's a long list of challenges, a long list of wants and desires from the industry about what they will require, what they'll need, and it opens up, well, how are we going to do this? To be honest, looking at the laundry list of things to do, it raises the question: how will we cope? Well, we don't necessarily have to cope. We have to ask ourselves, what do we have to take on? Some of these elements will be regionally bound. Operational maintenance is a great example of that. Our harbours will be a lot busier in years to come. Roads will be dug up for those cables coming ashore. That let's be eyes open about some of the disruption this will cause. But how do we make it work for us? And so, what do we have to take on in terms of the ports infrastructure and the grid? These are big, sizable, long lead items that we need to address as soon as possible. Ideally, out with the developer timeframe. And what do we want to take on? This is where we really get to the crux of it. Learning lessons from offshore wind, fixed offshore wind elsewhere, previously in the UK. What do we want to do here? What do we want to take on? So it's about flipping those challenges into opportunities. I'm really proud of that slide, just for those that haven't seen it before. Those same things, yeah, they're sizable, meaty things, but we have to see it in terms of where can we build from our strengths. We know the region has strengths. We know that the UK has huge capabilities, but how are we investing them early enough? Are we really thinking about it strategic enough to really take advantage of them in the longer term? And let's be clear, we talk about the Celtic Sea, of course we do, but huge export potential. We're aware of, we know some really great Cornish companies. I think I've seen a couple online already that are working well on flow in France. It's happening already. So the export potential is significant. So do bear that in mind. I appreciate, and Luke will speak to it later with concrete. It's there's a desire for shorter supply chains, but that export potential requires anchor and mooring, cables, vessels, and all the rest of it. There's real export potential for our expertise that we can build up in the next few years. And this believes the phrase that keeps coming up, no regret activity. I think it was Tim Stiven, the Crown Estate, that coined it. I'm hearing it going around the house, and it really makes sense. There has been a lot of hurry up and waiting between the developers and the government for the AR rounds. Absolutely, it's really important. That's the cue we take it from. But if there's no regret activity we can take in terms of upfront investment and really started to plan, hedging our bets in developments, that's a really a good soundbite to build on from on here on in. In terms of delivering capability and capacity, I'm going to skip straight to my second favourite slide now. Maybe not even my favourite slide. I'm not sure. I'm a bit too proud of my own slides. We've talked around a lot. This 4.5 gigawatt, the utopian vision is how we can get how we can deliver flow, and deliverability isn't talked about enough. But how we can do it with high UK content, which is talked about a lot, but how do we actually achieve it? Well, first of all, we're identifying those key market segments, anchoring more on operations maintenance, cables, concrete, and other that's cross-cutting themes I mentioned. And there's quite a lot of discussion about how. When I go to conferences, that's generally the umming and ahhing about, well, we all want that. We all agree on most of those. The OIC report that came out recently, which is well worth the read, backed up a lot of the work we've done and a lot of work elsewhere about the capability in the UK and the desire to route it into the Celtic Sea in a global market, of course. But the how, it seems to be a bit circular. So our concept really is we've got all this capability sitting over here, and by this I mean the private sector of all shapes and sizes, and we need to ask that more. We need to bring that earlier into the process. That's what we feel we need to. That's the approach that we will be taking this work program the next 18 months, 2 years. And so to these webinars, the first step in that, is in that way. We're also the portal, which we may mention later, but we'll certainly hear more about that in the near future. And studies commissioned earlier in 2024, which my colleague Matt will speak to later in the webinar. So okay, in the process of asking this capability, companies are big and small. We're hopeful that consortium may be building, so the matching of skill sets, and crucially building scale, that all important scale. And then there will be technical challenges, no doubt, many unknowns around that. Luke will do his best to inform you on what we know, what we think, but actually, ultimately, it's the private sector that will do it, we hope. Commercial barriers, we know there are many of those as well, and they're often unseen and tricky to understand from a capable company coming into offshore wind for the first time. So, who better to ask than the people who we hope will do it? That will hopefully inform investment and interventions that may be needed from the public sector, which hopefully we can play a role in, amongst many others. And then from that, kickstart delivery. That's what we're hoping to do. And crucially, from our point of view, selfishly Cornwall, but also the wider UK, doing all this, delivering these ambitions with UK content, and so it has a positive impact on Cornwall and the wider UK. That is our mission. That's what we're here today for. So I think we can move on fairly briefly to Luke. A couple of tidy up slides, really. Just to distinguish between capability and capacity, when we look at supply chain for offshore wind, we tend to think in terms of capability and assess that. And there's lots of good programs. I haven't mentioned Fit for Offshore Renewables, which I should do, and the Catapult with some great work in this space. SME is looking to enter the market. It's some really good stuff there. But what we think it needs a bit more attention is capacity. So that maximum amount of work that a person can handle. How much can we take on of this? If it turns out UK companies can't take on it, we need to know that, and we'd rather know that in advance. But I would say it's not for lack of capacity. I'm going to skip this slide because I'm way over time, and Luke is far more knowledgeable. So we're going to do a very technical switch over here by changing chairs. So I shall see you shortly.
Afternoon. So I'm Luke. Initially joined Celtic Sea Power to look at concrete substructures. Produced a piece of work around looking at delivering the required rates necessary for flow through concrete, and it's work that will follow through various projects. And concrete substructures are really where all of the value and all the jobs are contained, and really what we should be going for here in Cornwall. So yeah, all right. So today I'm just going to go through, as we see them, some of the technical and then commercial barriers to deploying flow, specifically concrete substructures, on an industrial scale. So to start off on technical, it's most certainly a novel concept. Whilst we do have a number of test and demo out there in concrete, there is a general lack of experience. There's yet to be a full-scale model working. And it's yet to be deployed on an industrial scale. At this stage, I suppose there's also a risk of baking in operational limitations if the whole system isn't considered. So it is a system of systems, and the floater needs to interact with other things like moorings and anchors, cables. Not so much an example of an operational limitation, but to think forward as well to decommissioning. We need to build these things now with decommissioning in mind. Moving on then, certainly a lack of port infrastructure. As yet, the Celtic Sea, we do not possess a port that could deliver flow, and flow are the key enablers. Sorry, ports are the key enablers of flow. So certainly technical challenges there around space, the manufacturing, and certainly wet storage would come into that. So close collaboration needed between ports, developers, and the actual substructure manufacturers themselves. Concrete floaters are heavy, about 20,000 tons. So how are they going to be moved around the site? Will you build them in situ and move the process around the floater? Will you move them through a production line? Will you build smaller modular components which will later be assembled perhaps on a floating dock? So all of those challenges there. And then following on from that, how are you going to get these things into the water? Traditional methods of heavy lift, skid, SPMT, and then perhaps looking toward novel concepts such as tug dock or a combination of all of them. So we're going to need to really achieve scale to get the cost down, and that's going to happen through industrialization, which needs to involve some kind of serial production. Wet storage being a key element of that. So we talked before about perhaps one floater, something like every 10 days, but that seems to be getting tighter. So say one floater a week, that serial production needs to happen 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, perhaps for the next 20 years. Whereas the deployment weather windows will maybe half of the year, 5 to 6 months. So that wet storage is a key challenge there to act as a buffer and really facilitate that serial production of the floaters and the deployment to meet the targets. Decarbonisation, so not just with the materials themselves, but throughout the supply chain and throughout the production methods. So opportunities here to learn lessons from Hinckley, and then looking down the line towards low carbon concretes, perhaps cement alternatives, rebar alternatives. So in that design phase and thinking ahead, really following that journey to decarbonisation within concrete and towards net zero. So these new components are coming, certainly to be aware of. Standardisation, there needs to be some kind of evolutionary race, but perhaps we'll converge, not necessarily around one unique floater, but standardisation across the whole process. For example, within O&M strategies, a standard approach to doing things. I mean, for example, up at the Port of Algeciras, I believe they're looking to produce 2 floaters, 2 concrete floaters, and up until the point of slip form, that supply chain can be shared. So it's not just a standardization of a floater, but being able to share infrastructure, I suppose. And then thinking about integration, as in the mating of the turbine and the substructure, that's going to really need to be considered because you're going to have huge limitations there with ports and cranes, and the geometry of the substructure will really play a part in that ease of integration and optimization with the rest of the system. It is a system of systems, so you're thinking about your interaction with the wind turbine generator itself, cables, moorings, dynamic cables, which is all very new and certainly a challenge there. And thinking about the O&M schedule, which as it stands isn't clear, but most likely be a tow back to port. And so bearing that in mind, designing for that, and with inspection and ease of inspection, minimizing downtime. And sort of mentioned it before, but decommissioning, big one. So we really need to be thinking about how best to build these structures now, thinking about end of life, repurposing or recycling in mind. Moving on to the technical challenges, again, as we see them, and by no means an exhaustive list, as with the, so looking more now into the specification of the concrete itself, will bring a number of its own challenges. So whilst it's perhaps not nuclear grade concrete, it's most certainly a specialist application and more challenging than most. So a number of challenges really around strength, fatiguing, loading, that durability in the marine environment, thinking about pre-tensioning and post-tensioning, high reinforcement ratios. Many of these are going to be very specific to the concept itself, the design itself, and then thinking about quality control throughout, maintaining that consistency. So moving on then to commercial barriers. Perhaps the biggest is the lack of solidified pipeline beyond 2035. So that lack of visibility, which really makes anything in terms of investment and infrastructure investment speculative beyond that 4.5 gigawatts, beyond the next leasing round, which of course feeds into unlocking that problem of unlocking the early supply chain investment. So this is where that chicken and egg situation develops, whereby on the one hand you have really early investment in supply chain needed to build out the industrial ecosystem that we need, that supply chain to get these projects going. And then on the other hand, a lack of long-term visibility, especially for ports, long-term revenue, which perhaps doesn't warrant that level of investment. And then thinking about the financiers and the insurers, who best to finance a project, where should that finance come from? Private equity, state. In areas there is from work that we've seen, and I think we'll allude to a couple of roundtables on risk and port and financing, which really highlight a lot of these barriers. But there is money there. There is equity and investment cases for offshore wind, but the harder aspect is they're getting it now when we need it, the early supply chain investment. So there is no current really fit for purpose contract for floating offshore wind. For the most part, they're borrowed from a mixture of onshore, oil and gas, and fixed. So of particular, I suppose, to floating offshore wind is that interface between the substructure and the turbine, which is very unique to floating offshore wind. So we will need to develop these strategies to effectively deploy. Now, whereas the auction for lease, the Crown Estates auction for lease, and the contracts for difference are fundamental instruments, really, in the development of a project, an offshore wind project. They do, in their own sense, bring some commercial barriers, particularly around the timeline from when a project will win a lease auction, when it will win a CFD. More so that time lag between winning those options and then really securing a financial investment decision and starting to place firm orders. So, for example, a CFD you'd want to win before you make a final investment decision. And when you make that investment decision, you're assuming that your ports and your infrastructure is in place, bearing in mind a port takes 6 years to develop. So, you know, there's room there to improve. I mean, in the auction for lease, there's at no point or across either of those mechanisms, there's no requirement for a developer to place firm orders or with ports. So we await the Crown Estates IM and perhaps potential non-price factors coming in to address those barriers there. Collaboration's been mentioned, certainly between developer, foundation, manufacturer, and port, and a coherence between, perhaps more relevant to government departments, some kind of joined up strategy. It's going to enable us to deliver this infrastructure, perhaps using some kind of multi-port approach. So cost reduction, as I said, we'll need to achieve scale through industrialisation, bring these projects, reduce the cost, make them bankable, and ultimately reduce cost to the consumer. And we've seen examples of fixed projects that have at least been shelved for now, where they've had to go back to the drawing board. The projects aren't bankable. So this slide is really just to signpost you towards the guide to an offshore wind farm, which is a great resource, especially for those of us who aren't too familiar. It will take you all the way through all the aspects of a floating wind farm, from development to decommission, even talks about contract and strategies there. So that link will be eliminated through the slides, I believe. And then to mention ports, the key enablers of flow, along with grid, and represent a number of technical and commercial barriers within themselves. So as I say, there will be an aspect of design to local. We will need to think about the physical attributes of our ports. There's only so far you can dredge. So close collaboration there with the ports to build this serial production within our infrastructure, within the limitations of the ports, perhaps using innovative designs such as tug dock. And I can't see my notes there, but anything to add, Matt? Yeah, I'm happy with that. And I believe, Phil, you're going to take on the spot.
Yeah, only 2 notes. I think we're obviously still getting used to the high tech approach of switching seats during a webinar, but that's the way it goes. Okay, I mean, I think this is very much a sort of a slide that's meant to provoke, and also in full awareness that we are, our credibility as public sector is not a great deal, because you, the private sector, need to assess this in your own terms whether this is going to be worth for you. But in outline terms, we feel that the region and the UK generally has real strengths, and the region particularly in terms of workforce. That pivoting Hinkley is a real possibility floating offshore wind if the technology choice goes to concrete, and similarly that supply chain and materials are established through that, and that really has a real benefit of real strength that we can offer is resilience. Cheaper and simpler production facilities require relative to steel. The technology choice which Luke has been alluding to, the way I've come to understand it, as much discussion about concrete or steel, actually it seems apparent to me that it'll be either concrete and steel, or steel with concrete. Opportunities, I think we can talk around. There's huge export potential, and there's foundations if it comes to pass. But also, I think we've got to see it as an opportunity that of a new approach to how we contract this. But this is all to be figured out. And when I say we, I mean the private sector online, and that first mover advantage is all key. Weaknesses. We're very aware that experience of floating is lacking in floating offshore wind, but that's not unique. No one's done this before at scale. So, we did deliberate whether to move some of these weaknesses into the strengths. Happy to take comment on this as a means of provoking. Now, threats then, moving on to threats. Investment, we know, in current lack of port facilities, as Luke has covered. In terms of threats, there's pace is a real real issue. We do have to get moving with this if we're going to really take it on. The market is uncertain, and there's that bankability, as many you'll have seen in the news about renewable energy for offshore wind, and that lack of clarity, as it seems through, is in the foundation design. But therein, also, what I love about a good SWOT analysis is that you tend to be able to move these bullets around as suits your drive. But I think on that note, we're going to move to Matt. If we can skip chairs once again. I think we might do this differently next time, but that's okay. It's musical chairs around here. With what's a good look like, and
that was fairly slick. Thank you, Phil. We'll do some kind of sliding chair for next time, maybe. But there we go. Well, good morning, everybody, and good to see you all here, and appreciate your time looking at this subject. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time thinking about okay, what does good look like for Cornwall and for the UK? Phil and Luke have done a really good job, I think, of providing a framework for this. Just to reiterate, it's not for us to choose whether developers go for it or steel, but we can see some regional benefits if concrete is the option, and we think we've got some strengths there and therefore it's worthy of some further investigation, shall we say. So what does good look like for Cornwall and the region? Now, in my position, I have the glorious and wonderful ability to say things which, quite frankly, can be as ambitious as I like. And however, with this particular statement about what we think good looks like for Cornwall when we're talking about concrete delivery, it does come with a degree of logic. We would like to see a regional concrete manufacturing port facility in the Celtic Sea region capable of delivering at least a 1.5 gigawatt project by 2035. The logic there is we've got leases potentially kicking off, a leasing process kicking off of 4.5 gigawatts. That's 3 projects starting in the next few weeks and coming through by the end of the year. 40% of the foundations currently in service in test and demo projects around the world are concrete. Therefore, it's not an unrealistic presumption to suggest that we could see a similar amount of concrete foundations in the Celtic Sea. We would want to kind of capture as much of that that particular local manufacturer as we could, because that has a significant impact on jobs and GVA in our region. And I don't think that's an unfair thing to wish for, shall we say. I think we also recognise that there needs to be a significant amount of scale to deliver that type of project. So we would like to see, the capacity, able to manage the delivery, manufacturing of those foundations, including inputs and the use of a local concrete aggregate rebar in our region. Again, we have got a local concrete supply chain. We've got materials in the region. The capability exists and has just delivered or is delivering Hinkley Point. So it's not an unreasonable desire to see that ramp up and pivot into supporting what we want in the region. So that's what we think good looks like. Now that needs a bit of refinement, and it also needs some thinking about what the specification looks like, etc. I think the realistic or the reality is that there has to be assumptions at this stage, but there is an opportunity for us to kind of start to think about some no regrets activity, which potentially starts to put us in a position where we understand how we get to where we want to go in terms of what the goods look like. So how are we going to do that? So how are we going to do that? The floating offshore wind strategic sector project, how are we going to do that? Well, we think that the best thing to do is ask the private sector, how are you going to deliver on what we think good looks like, taking into account all of the technical challenges that we are aware of, potentially taking into account some assumptions that we are aware of, but probably more importantly, thinking about how you're developing the scale to deliver on that. So we think the best way to get that information is to pay for it. So we will be procuring technical studies, feasibility reports, call it what you will, in the new year, where we'll be asking companies, businesses, consortium, partnerships, collaborations to try and address these challenges and think about A, how could we deliver this in a technically credible way? B, how can we ensure we've got the scale in order to be a realistic counterparty to the size of contracts we think are coming down the track? How can that be investable? What is the impact going to be on Cornwall? How much land would you need for that? What logistics requirements would you need for that? There are a range of questions here that we think it will be a good time to put our thinking caps on and come forward with some solutions, ideally investable solutions that we can really take forward and start to kind of consider, right, well, what do we need to do as a region to support those? What do we need to do as a region to sort of push for any de-risking interventions which might be necessarily to get there? And how do we develop the products that the developers will be crying out for? Our developer friends are taking an awful lot of risk developing their projects in the dark, in the blind. They need these products in the future, and there's an opportunity here to get ahead of the curve. So I think that's what we are aiming for. And as I stress, we think the best way to try and pay you for it. I am going to be honest, we're not paying you very much, but we will be paying you something. So I'll just refer back to that slide that Phil articulated at the beginning. We're into that how. This is why we're talking about studies commissioned in early 2024. This is what we're going to do. To try and help that process along, we are designing a, it says portal there, but I think we're moving away from that term because it's got certain connotations. We are moving to a platform which will help us articulate and host some of the more the detail around this. We're not just going after concrete. There are other areas that we're looking at as well, which will also provide an opportunity for matchmaking for those who are interested but maybe don't have a link into the network. And that should be launched and live in its earliest format early in the new year, ahead of these the first of these procurements going live sort of probably early March. So that's us in time frame. So I think that's the end of, I could see Phil's lurking over my shoulder. We really aren't slick enough on this, Phil, are we?
Okay.
So, yeah, we'll get better at this anyway. But
lots of questions coming in, so I'm going to take the reins.
Right, you are.
And then drop them into the bus.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll look forward to hearing some of your questions.
Yeah, I quite like musical chairs. I think it really works. No, it doesn't. I'm really thrilled to see so many questions coming through, but more thrilled to see the capability online that is better qualified to answer those questions than I am. So thank you, Dan Benson, who is real leader in this, for volunteering before I volunteered him. However, Luke, are there a couple there that you might take on, or?
I did see one regarding draft.
Yeah, draft. And yeah, go on. So how much draft? This is from Edward. Thank you, Edward. How much draft will you need at the quayside for a 20,000 ton hull?
Well, developers like to keep their parameters to themselves, but there is a reference turbine out there that we use, the reference, and so off the top of my head, fully laden is sort of 15 meters draft. But just to think about some other concrete substructures that can be deployed with, say, just 6 meter draft, but it really depends on the method of deployment, whether you're using a floating barge. But that one is difficult. Perhaps there are some developers on the call, I'm not sure, who have designed concrete hulls that would have more of an idea. But
yeah, that's okay. I think, as I say, we're not going to solve this in a webinar, nor are we going to attempt to. Really, this is the start of the process. So we'd be delighted to help connections be made between the guys between you guys and girls who are interested in this, because that's how this is going to happen. It's not going to be from us pontificating on a webinar. However, that said, I'm happy to drop Luke under a bus again, because you are, I think, the expert in my eyes. A couple of questions there I was also going to pick up. There was a good one about road haulage from John, I think, in Cleveland, but that's maybe another webinar. This one, how new cement concrete producers will be integrated within the project without having clear standards for such materials yet. So you touched on standardization, Luke. Any further comment on that, except?
No, the first part of that question is that talking about smaller producers being involved in the project. Well, I suppose by forming some sort of consortia. But on the second part of the question, is that geared toward new technologies in cement that are yet to be in standard? So I think close collaboration with people like the MPA and really keeping an eye on that journey of decarbonisation of concrete and designing with that in mind.
Yeah, there's two questions there. Thank you. I think pronouncing your name is Isa. Yeah, it's two really good questions there, to which I think my answer of I don't know is probably legitimate, but it's to be defined by the knowledge that exists. In terms of how new companies are small, as Luke interprets it, smaller ones, has to be a way to go. There has to be some sort of partnership for this to work, whichever way you look at it. In terms of clear standardizations, yeah, I think that there's a lot to come into play there, isn't there? Again, please don't accept ours as the final word. talk to each other, and we'll figure out the solutions together in the studies that Matt mentioned. I'm going to ask John Best. Hello, John, asking various questions about the logistics of it. I'm not sure that looks like one up your street, Luke, in terms of, do you see the required aggregates being brought in by sea? And they've done some work on supply chains.
Yeah, I think I could see that most likely being their solution. We do have pretty established aggregate industry in Cornwall, secondary aggregates, and we do have the ability to deploy by sea, and thinking about other parts of the supply chain that do all arrive by sea, such as towers, blades. But I think, yeah, with manufacturing facility, pretty essential. It's going to be located in some kind of port. I'd say it's going to come by sea.
Great. I'm just trying to get handle of the conversations keep coming. Well, I think we'll keep it to chat. I'm sort of tempted to open it up for you guys, but should we unmute people and see the chaos that ensues? I think, yeah, let's go for it. I can see some real experts online as well, so and thank you for those links coming through. That's really helpful. So I'm going to unmute anyone who wants to put their hand up and actually answer some of these questions with more knowledge than certainly myself. If not Luke, then please do feel free. Any hands up at all? Oh, Tessa, great. How do I unmute everybody? Hello, Tessa, how are you doing?
Hi, good, thank you. Yeah, great presentation, thank you. Really interesting. Yeah, it's really good to see kind of the recognition of that, the local content, and kind of the place that concrete can play in that. I'm really interested to know if you know of any mechanisms where you can kind of encourage developers down that route. Like, are you engaging with the Crown Estate on leasing, or like how we can encourage that selection of concrete in floater selection? If that's a
big question. With. That's a big. I mean, certainly in terms of we are engaging with the Crown Estate, and they're very alert to, as many people, if you're not aware, that local content is going to be a key part. We hope will be a key part, and a key potentially, we're all be binding to what things. But we also, I think, yes, there are inducements to be made, I think, is a short answer, and we're hopeful the Crown Estate will come through with that. But also in terms of the practicalities,
so it can go O2.
Can be made.
There's a whole list. I think you could probably find it, but that would be the one that you would need to look at.
I could add to that. I think there's
confused. Just a reminder to keep muted unless you're speaking would be really helpful. I knew it'd be chaos. Go on, Luke. Do you want to speak?
Yeah, I think if there's one policy instrument or mechanism, if you like, that would really support concrete, it would be that of carbon, because hands down, really the only alternative to concrete is steel, and concrete it beats in terms of carbon, it beats steel, and low carbon is also a proxy for local content. So there are definitely various policy mechanisms that we can align. I don't know if you're going to add into this, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a point really. I think you don't like to use the term local content. It's not one which is doesn't fit particularly well with things like WTO rules. However, if we do believe in the inherent competitiveness of local solutions, that in itself will drive an increased regional content. I think we've always got to be aware of where our strengths are, what we can do and what we can do well, and it's absolutely crucial. This is an international marketplace, competitive, that we have to be competitive, and there is inherent competitiveness through carbon impact, for example, as Luke points out, and also supply chain resilience and supply chain security. So I think that's kind of where we should be, what we should be considering, I suppose, in what does the offer look like, what does the product look like, to make it worth selecting. And let's bear in mind, it is developers and their risk money which does the selection, not us. We're just here to try and provide potential solutions.
Great, thanks. I think
Great,
we'll move on, but if I think someone else was trying to chip in there, so but we'll put hand up and we'll try and manage that as best we can. We've got quite a lot of people on the line. But John, what's your question, John?
It's John Best with a question and observation, really. Thanks for a great presentation, really helpful to start something off like that. I was interested in the comments there just recently about that we don't talk about local content, but if there is one industry that's probably likely to be local, it's going to be concrete and location by the very nature of it. But the technology developed can be a global product and the management of that. So I do think there's a huge amount that could be gained potentially from the oil and gas industry and from some of the work that's already been done. So it really is the opportunity for developers and people to get in early and start to think about what the art of the possible is, as opposed to get a long way down the design route and then think about it. And we have seen challenges there where, let's say, innovation has been brought to the table too late. My second point was really about forming some form of consortia and collaborative group, rather like an EGA, a trade association, or a Deep Wind, or a Forth and Tay, so that there's an association with people. We're always going to have competition for sure, but ultimately, if we can collaborate through a competitive process, then it's going to be much richer for the area. That's just my thoughts and points.
Do you want to pick up on that, Matt?
No, just to say hi, John. Long time no see. Hope you well.
Good.
Great. Thank you all. There's some really good questions coming through and comments and thoughts. I think we'll try and pick off a few with the time left, but I think the message that's coming through loud and clear is that the capability in this virtual room is really strong. Talk to each other, and if our inducement for an ITC in the new year is helpful along that, we do hope it prompts more really constructive conversation, not just sort of conversations at the side of a conference, conversations that lead to really working up a solution. There's a couple of technical questions which I'm going to throw Luke under. How many metric tons of concrete do we think will be needed? For context, 2021 around 22.2 million metric tons of ready mixed concrete was produced in the United Kingdom, and that's from John Fox.
As in sort of a floater or for a project? Sorry.
John, you on the line? Want you maybe clarify a little bit? Well,
I mean, if we take the 4.5 gigawatts, for example, which is
yeah, sorry, I am.
4.5 gigawatts, the projects that hopefully we'll see leased next year and be built out by 2035. In terms of concrete, in terms of aggregates, 4 million tons thereabout. Cement close to 1 million tons, and rebar about 700,000 tons. And then looking forward to that pipeline beyond toward 24 gigawatts, then you're looking somewhere around 30 million tons.
Perfect. Thanks very much. That was easy.
So
good to have an expert.
I mean, obviously, this is a point where the expert, the knowledgeable heads in concrete on this call. We really want your take on this. We had a workshop a good year or so ago, wasn't it? And we were surprised. We thought that the numbers would knock people for six and be completely pretty unattainable. Actually, we were quite surprised to see actually it was sort of not quite. We'll get it to you next week. But it didn't seem to phase the concrete industry. But this is big stuff we're talking about. So, we're really interested to find the reaction from the people that know about how achievable this is. Any further questions from the floor? The messages are coming in thick and fast. I'm really struggling to keep up with them, which is great. Sound of a good webinar. So do bear with us while we go through them, especially with the disembodied voice element, switching chairs and musical element. I think it's Edward Cook keeps coming up with good questions. How long does it take to open a concrete aggregate mine and processing facility, or can existing output meet potential demand? Which I think is riffing on what I just mentioned there. Are there any takers for that in the room? I mean, any of the concrete voices interested to answer this either online or potentially off? But is it achievable? Is the question. Any early takers? That's okay. If not, we can move on. But we're also getting some more questions at the point from Richard as well. Forbes about SIBO UK own and operate 2 cement carrier ships and a range of mobile cement storage silos ready to collect any port in the area with a range of cementitious, is that a word? Fantastic. And low carbon cement replacement products. I mean, what I'm seeing from the comments here is real knowledge and capability. You know, share as much as you can, and let's work up some solutions. Is the key driver for this whole webinar. So please do go. So, minerals planning authorities. I think that's Sidonia has mentioned. Yeah, MPA. We've been engaged with those guys. So they're aware of the challenge and the opportunity. So yeah, definitely, certainly something we're keen to move on. And Richard as well, commenting upon comments. I'm inclined to start to wrap this webinar up because we cannot contain these conversations. Let's keep them going offline. We will be in touch with all of you following this webinar. We hope you'll join us for the following ones, where we'll keep building through anchoring, mooring, inter-array cables, operations and maintenance, and there's cross-cutting themes. So do stay tuned, and we have your emails. And if you're okay, we can happily continue the conversation and put you guys in touch with each other. Rebecca's asked about decommissioning. I think that's where we start to draw the line, isn't it? I think it's an absolutely brilliant question, Rebecca. Do you want to take that on, Luke, as a final word? Seems appropriate to start to wrap it up on decommissioning.
Yeah, certainly. What is the question?
So I think, go on. It's can you talk more about the design ambitions, requirements for decommissioning?
That's a good question.
Can we even bring it to scale? Is it too difficult to consider at this stage?
I mean,
do
it
we
would
need
be
to consider
interesting to consider what developers, the technology developers are considering at this stage. But like I say, it really needs to be thought about that either repurposing or reuse. Interestingly, there's a Troll B platform, concrete semi-submersible, has just had its life extended. So I think its operational life would be 35 years and counting. So who knows if we'll get more life than anticipated. And harder than steel to recycle, but yeah, interesting what to see.
You've mentioned the steel word right at the end then, Luke. Has that been a terrible omission of ours on this webinar? Is that the elephant in the room here? Do we need to talk a bit more about it?
I don't think it is, and as Matt mentioned, it will most certainly be a combination of steel and concrete. But with regards to that steel element, and both platforms will have around 100 tons of secondary steel on them as well. So it's most certainly a steel element, yeah.
Okay, and the expensive rebar in South Wales, go on, Matt.
No, I'm just going to say when it comes, I think it needs to be sort of clear with everybody. This isn't a competition between concrete and steel foundations. There are some really good steel designs out there, and they're deployed around the world. When it comes to primary fabrication or primary delivery, looking at where we are as a region right now, there is it feels like we're pushing at a low-hanging fruit to look at how you deliver concrete at the production rates you're going to need for the Celtic Sea. That doesn't mean that we believe steel foundations won't be deployed here. It's we'd be incredibly supportive of any solutions which increase our content through that. However, we've got a finite amount of resource and time, so we've plumped for this one because it seems logical to put some effort into this. I think that's the only point.
I think that I think that's where we exactly where we come from, that technology platform developer agnostic approach, looking for what good looks for the region. Right, I think we're going to wrap it up. We're a little bit early, but that's okay. If we carry on, we won't stop. So I think we're going to invest in a webcam and maybe some air conditioning for the next webinar. We hope to see you there. But thank you very, very much for the interactions. This is the start of the process, or for those who've started already, great. We want to hear from you, and we'll be in touch again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.